Hey guys, this is Replant. My name is Jacob Young. I'm a church planter with Sovereign Grace in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I'm here with Ricky Alcantar. Is that how you pronounce it, Ricky? Alcantar?
That's fine. That's fine.
Dude, I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
That's fine. That's great. Yeah.
Okay, so Ricky A from Texas, and Ricky wants to start us out with a sponsor.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys for joining us. Today's show is sponsored by Hell's Bells, a VHS tape set on the dangers of rock and roll. Journey through the dark side of rock as Hell's Bells unmask the message behind the music. There you will look squarely in the face of something beyond the human potential. Warning. In order to provide an accurate and insightful analysis of the rock industry, some material has been included that is shocking and unsuitable for younger audiences, including George Michael, Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, Metallica, The Doors, Billy Idol, Madonna, The Rolling Stones, AC/DC, Fleetwood Mac, The Beatles, and many more.
Oh my God.
Please support our sponsor by picking up a VHS copy of Hell's Bells in your nearest Christian thrift store. There will assuredly be one there waiting for you.
I was going to say either there or Craigslist. Oh goodness!
I was at the tail end of youth group after like that stuff was getting shown to the youth group, and the guy that was leading youth for a while said the problem with Hell's Bells as a VHS, like warning against secular rock music, is that it largely is clips of rock music intercut with why it's dangerous. But the problem is that the rock music is catchy. Like you finish the VHS series like you just like start thinking like these songs that you didn't know before, now you do know.
Right. Now I want to go buy Aerosmith. I'm not sure. I left the VHS thinking I need to go get Aerosmith is basically the problem, right?
Yeah, it probably really encouraged some youth group kids down a really dangerous path and was exactly the opposite effect that they hoped it would have. So, so that's our sponsor for today's show. So
yeah, I'm so grateful for their contribution. So
Matt, you want to kick us off with your who you are, why you're on a video in front of somebody's computer?
Yeah, so my name is Jacob. My dad was military, so we grew up moving around all over the place. I was born in Orange County, out there in Eric Trebesky's area, and we grew up moving up all over the place. But my wife and I met in high school. The story for our relationship is very not I kiss dating goodbye. We were in high school AP European history class together at the beginning of all great relationships. And I thought she had the cutest hips in class. And so from there, we got married after college and joined Sovereign Grace. We went to Covenant Fellowship Church. And so then over a number of years, we're up here. I'm leading a church plant here in Manchester, New Hampshire. So that's kind of the background for me. Ricky, before you tell us your background, if you were to have a pirate radio name, what would that radio name be?
It would be Art Vandelay.
What exactly is the background on that?
It is the infamous alias of George on Seinfeld. That whenever he wants to make himself appear more powerful, Art Vandelay is an architect. And so whenever he meets somebody he's trying to impress, he says Art Vandelay and then introduces himself as an architect. So I've found that personally helpful in a number of pastoral situations, and that would be my go-to.
Yeah.
What would your pirate name be, Jacob?
I would probably go with something along the lines of Rapier or Romulus or something, basically some Harry Potter reference of some kind. And then if somebody didn't get that, I would just revert to Star-Lord. That would be my go-to for that. And which Star-Lord has definitely been helpful in a number of evangelistic opportunities. So.
Yeah, our sponsor's not real happy right now with you referencing Harry Potter.
Yeah.
they just gave me a call. So if you
They dropped the
keep
sponsor.
that to a minimum. Yeah, they're actually not sponsoring the rest of this podcast.
Yeah. That's usually what happens with my relationships. There's a point where within 10 minutes of knowing anybody, I bring up Harry Potter, and that's a determining factor of whether it's going to continue or not. So
That's great, man. Any little people?
yeah, so Michelle and I have been married about 8 years, and we have Owen, who is going to be 5 in October, and Isaac, who's going to be 2 in October. We didn't plan it this way, but they're 3 days apart in terms of their birthdays. And they are highly dramatic and highly adventurous boys. So that's the family.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, for me, I am born and raised in El Paso, Texas, which is the raggedy edge of Texas, at the kind of the intersection of 2 countries and 3 states, and a place unlike any other place in the world. I grew up in church. My dad is a small group leader. He sort of functioned like a bivocational elder in the church for many years. Grew up having lots of people in our house every other Wednesday. He led small groups that whole time. And actually, I went to college in El Paso at the University of Texas, El Paso, the home of Don Haskins, the only school so far to win an NCAA basketball championship in Texas. So pretty proud about that.
Right.
And grew up going to basketball games, watching Don Haskins. Love that guy. And I thought I was going to leave. Didn't like El Paso, but when along the way, God totally changed my heart. I went away mid-college for a couple of years. One of those years was to intern at my wife's church. She's from Maryland, so she grew up going to Covenant Life Church. And I was there for a year as an intern. We met. She did not like me at all. It took me a year to convince her to date me in a long, slow campaign. Step 1 being, I am a person and exist. Step 2 being, I'm not a disagreeable person and I exist. Step 3 is, I sort of like this person on a friend level and I exist. Like, so just from 0 to willing to date me, that's where we went over that year. And then we got married, attended the pastor's college in 2009, 2010, and came back here. We have 2 little people. My son Ford is turning 3 in just a couple days, and my son Cohen just turned 1 yesterday. So we're going to a baseball game tonight to celebrate their birthdays together, which unfortunately, like with your kids, if your birthdays are close enough together, we will save money and celebrate them at the same time for the rest of your life.
Yeah. We've had conversation about that because Owen he's going to be 5. And so he's going to kind of notice that he's got like a double team on his birthday. And, it's like, hey buddy, it's just the way it goes, like, we're all going to go to the baseball game. We have local team as well. It's so what, So, okay, I want to know, given your sponsorship, the more important question might be how important has the Goonies been in your spiritual life?
This is an indication of my spiritual life that I'm not allowed to see the movie The Goonies until I was in my 20s, because it had several things that were concerning to my parents. One being mild cursing. Second being dangerous behavior. Third, disregard for parental authority. And fourth, spookiness. Now, spookiness was probably the broadest of the categories that got a lot of things thrown out of being able to be watched. It was too spooky. So, so now when I saw The Goonies later, I found it an amazing film that everyone should see. And I think is actually, when you take away the mild cursing, antisocial behavior, dangerous kind of decisions by children, you strip all that away, there's a great message there. So,
right. Which
like basically, if you cut out about 90% of the film, what you're left with is a touching scene where a disabled guy finds a friend, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah. So basically, the last like 2 minutes of the movie, basically.
Yeah. What about you, Jacob?
Well, that scene, apart from the bullet holes, the dead bodies, some of the underground tunnels and pirate traps and gasoline fires, that kind of encapsulates my childhood. So, so now, if another question, and then we'll start talking about books. But if you could have dinner with any living celebrity, now that has to be a non-Christian celebrity, who would it be and why?
I got to pick one, right?
Well, I guess one. Okay. I mean,
I'm gonna have can I do a dinner party? I would like to have a dinner party with Dick Van Dyke and Steve Martin.
Okay.
Because I think they're both hilarious. I think they were super innovative comedians. I respect anyone that is able to not just do comedy but do other stuff. Like Steve Martin randomly plays the banjo super well.
Does he really?
Like, what does that have to do with anything? Nothing. Yeah. But it's awesome, and he can do it. And he's toured like playing the banjo, just apart from the comedy, which I think is amazing. And then Dick Van Dyke, I think he's a brilliant comic. And so I would love to have a dinner party with them, or listen to a totally different scenario, sit down and listen to vinyl records with Ira Glass, which does not dispel any of my like hipsterness, but I think Ira Glass is just a phenomenal, probably one of the best storytellers that we have. I love that guy. Yeah. And I would love to shake his hand, which I imagine would not be an especially strong handshake, but an especially contemplative handshake.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine.
It'd be a very soothing and friendly, and very intriguing and engaging.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Okay, yeah. So sorry, I totally cheated that question. What about you?
Well, so for me, and my wife knows this answer, and she knows why I have this answer. But so for me, these are two like polar opposites of the pop culture scene. But I would, if I were to do a dinner party, I might do this just to get the sort of reactive chemistry of the context. But I would be interested in Taylor Swift, because I find her music incredibly fun to listen to, and she's just an incredibly intriguing kind of like pop culture personality. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I, for my entire podcasting life, have listened to Mark Maron's podcast, and there is some cursing in it, but I find Mark Maron incredibly fascinating to listen to. He's a highly neurotic comedian. He's been around probably about 25, 30 years. And his podcast, the WTF Pod, is just incredibly fun to listen to because he does great conversations. Incredibly insightful guy, highly neurotic. So it's fun to listen to somebody kind of talk through their neurosis and the same sort of complexes that I would experience. And so I don't even know, I hadn't even thought about like a dinner party between the two of them, but that would be interesting to see Taylor Swift, pop culture diva, and Mark Maron, alt comedy interviewer, sit down with Jacob, the unimpressive pastor from New England. So, I guess, it would only get more interesting if you add Trent Reznor to that. So I don't know. That's kind of what it would look like.
That's strong, man. I respect that. There's no shame. There should be no shame in you listening to the latest Taylor Swift album, just as there is no shame in me listening to recently the new Carly Rae Jepsen album. Like I feel like we're both married men of boys. We're fathers of sons, and if we can't listen to pop music, I mean, who can? So
yeah, this is an open and accepting place, Ricky. So you can confess that here.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So to move on to another question, books. Tell me about the books you're reading, like your favorite books right now.
So I just read. I actually am reading the book that you recommended on essentialism.
Oh, no way. That's such a good book.
And it is. There's two things I love about it. I love the content of it. It's freeing. It's kind of a good antidote to always just trying to do more. Which you face a constant temptation as a pastor or anybody with kind of an open-ended job description. There's always more things you could be doing or other things you could be doing, and it helps kind of distill that. It's not a Christian book, but it's super helpful. Plus, the book is gorgeous. I love books that are fun to read and open, and it's a well-presented book that underlines kind of the message of the book. So I love that. And then I just finished reading a book on Chuck Colson called The Colson Way by Owen Strachan, and I thought that book was awesome. I didn't know anything about Chuck Colson really, other than reading a book or two from him growing up, and I found him a super fascinating guy, a great model of engaging the culture, which is what Owen's trying to do in the book. I love that. And then to put myself to sleep at night, I'm reading The Martian, which is the novel that the movie with Matt Damon's based on. And there is some cursing in the book, but it's about a guy that's stranded on Mars that has to survive at least for 4 years until he can be rescued. And it includes a lot of super detailed descriptions about science-y things that he has to do, like make water, and he has like hydrogen and oxygen, and he's using all these other things. And as a creative writing major, I don't understand. I really, honestly don't understand anything that he's saying. But it is the perfect book because reading him walking me through a number of important chemical reactions is the perfect thing to fall asleep to, so that I could have
Well, see, I was going to say
neurotic dreams.
Would falling asleep to desertion, abandonment, basically the base desire for survival, is that actually does that create restful dreams for you? Basically kind of like zombie dreams on Mars. Is that helpful?
Well, but see, the great thing about the novel is that the protagonist's view of life is basically well, this kind of stinks, but all I can do is, make some water today and then go watch the Dukes of Hazzard. And it makes me feel like my life, whatever happened that day, I open this book and I read this guy's life and I think it wasn't a bad day, all things considered.
I could have people who hate me or difficult pastoral situations or a sermon that I need to write, but at least I'm not stranded on Mars trying to make water.
See, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly why it's a relief to me. That's why I used to love watching when I was really stressed out, I'd watch The West Wing, because I'd go home and watch The West Wing and it would feel like at least my life isn't that bad. I'm not trying to avert nuclear war or pass a life-saving bill. Literally, I talked to some people, they were upset. I need to balance a budget. Okay, what else? Let's wake up and do this again. So those are my books.
Well, so to divert for a second, I've watched the entire West Wing season twice, the whole thing. I love that show. And you've watched it?
Oh, dude, I absolutely love The West Wing. I love Aaron Sorkin. I mean, obviously the show went downhill after he left, kind of understandably so. But I thought it was fantastic. The writing is unbelievable.
Oh yeah, the first 3 seasons they're incredible. A little fact about it: did you know that was originally designed around what's his name? Is it Rob? What's his name?
Oh yeah. I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Rob Lowe with all the commercials.
Yeah, Rob Lowe. Yeah.
Yeah. So the show was originally designed around his character, but the cast had such a great chemistry, and then Bartlett came out as such a queer, main character, kind of organizing center. That's why he eventually left the show. Is my understanding is that Rob Lowe came on because he was going to be the lead character, and then after it kind of dropped that it was going to be more about the whole team, he kind of left. So. Anyhow.
Wow, dude. Well, if nobody gets anything else out of this podcast other than that they need to go watch The West Wing, they should do that. So stop the video. Go watch The West Wing.
That'll be fine. Free. So,
How about you, man? What have you been reading lately?
Well, so you mentioned that book Essentialism, and I love that book. I read it about 6 months or so ago, and it was incredibly helpful. And so I'm actually rereading it kind of slowly. And like you're saying, like just the number of principles, the way I've tried to describe it to guys is that it's one thing to read a book about Christian disciplines. It's another thing to read a book about being disciplined, like the very nature of being, what does it mean to be disciplined? And so I feel like a lot of that book is in sync with what it means to try to be disciplined and how you just even approach making decisions about what you're going to do. So it's helpful. I mean, incredibly helpful. I'm reading this book. It got mentioned a couple of years ago. Calvin's Company of Pastors.
Cool.
It's really cool. It's an analysis of basically Calvin's pastoral ministry philosophy, how he built the Geneva pastoral ministry team. Very obviously like a Presbyterian sense of things, which would map on in many ways to what Sovereign Grace does, depending on what your sensitivities are. But it's incredibly helpful. Like this last chapter I was reading was talking about how at the time with the initial kind of pastors that came in under Calvin, they were all not from Geneva, so they weren't natives to Geneva. And over like the next 50 years or so, there actually began to be a sense of bitterness between the people of Geneva and Calvin's company of pastors. It was kind of like low grade, but it was still there. And it was in some ways, it reflected the times where you mostly had, foreigners who were educated and local people who weren't. But it's, for me, as we're starting this church here in Manchester and thinking about what does it look like to raise up pastors over the next 5 years, it makes me learn this lesson of like, okay, we need to be very intentional to try to raise up local pastors, guys who are, saved, discipled through the church plant, through what God's doing here, and then raise them up into eldership as a value of God loving Manchester itself. So not looking to import pastors from the outside, but raise them up from the inside. So that book's been really helpful. And then I'm also reading a book on the Welsh Calvinistic fathers of Wales. It's
that's awesome.
Yeah, these guys. So Whitfield had during the revival of the 1800s or 1700s. The Welsh really got exploded by the gospel, but their tradition actually interests me because they were Calvinists who were Methodists, so they cared about holiness, they cared about good doctrine, and they were like crazy expressive in terms of their personal worship. They were called the Welsh Jumpers. They would have like these meetings, and guys would stand up in the back, and they would just be jumping with joy. And there's actually the story of John Wesley coming through and saying like, "Hey, can you quiet those guys down, or I'm going to leave?" And the pastor at the church responded, "Listen, if they've been set free from the bondage of death, why can't they jump?" Or that sort of sentiment of like, if you've been set free from death, of course you're going to jump. So you have that expressive worship.
That should be the title of our next Sovereign Grace worship album. That should be the full title of it.
Welsh
if you've
Jumpers.
Been set free, why can't? Yeah, or Welsh Jumpers. Why can't you jump? Should be the title of the Sovereign Grace worship album.
Yeah, with a picture of Bob Coughlin jumping on the front. Like that would be.
Yeah. I love that. That's an awesome story.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm reading right now.
Dude.
So tell me, so Ricky, so we've got this blog going, the Plant Replant. You're the replant side of the name. Fill us in on what replanting means for you, kind of what that's looked like for you, and then why you are contributing to the blog under that capacity.
Yeah. So I mean, we've all heard this, that like somewhere around 4,000 churches a year shut their doors, and most churches in the United States are either plateaued or losing people. Not that numbers are everything, but just relative health. The majority of churches in the United States are not growing. The majority of them are either just holding steady or are on a downward trend. And so I have a huge heart for the many, many, many churches that are being led and served by people that may be in a tough place, that maybe things have been kind of stagnant for a while, or there's difficulties or challenges. And many times these are churches with saints that love Jesus, that love one another, that love the church. And really what they need is sort of a replanting work, a reestablishing of their vision and mission. Maybe, some practical things, often like forming some strong teams of elders, deacons, getting the church kind of government in order. So I have a huge heart because there's so much potential. There's so many churches like this, I think, in the United States that could be revitalized or replanted. And so about 5 years ago, our church was kind of in a similar place, a church that I'd grown up in El Paso, but I'd gone away. And I came back just to serve for a year as an intern. And their team was really wrestling with kind of the health of the church, the state of the church. How do we bring life to the church? It's one of those churches, it wouldn't be unfamiliar to many, that kind of it's the most notable days of the church were in the past rather than what was currently happening. And so just trying to think through, like, Lord, what do you want from us? And I've read actually since then that churches that are about 20 to 25 years old always go through kind of a midlife or quarter life crisis as a church. Like, the people that start it about 20 to 25 years later are left wondering, man, should we really do this? We're feeling tired. We're feeling burnt out. And so, so that's what we've done kind of in El Paso, but obviously not just me. Our team has really taken this on for the last 5 years or so, and sought to bring new life. And our trajectory was, the first year we thought everything was just we're fix a couple things that it would take off. And it really was a couple years that were tough. We lost people, things, we had to dismantle some things in order to rebuild some things. There's a year or two of just trying to, okay, then we're back to where we were originally. And then now I think by God's grace, we're in a season of seeing God do some really good things that are just more obvious. God's always doing good things, but it's always good to be in a season sometimes where you can see there's some fruit coming out of this. And so really, I think some of the things we've been sowing for the last several years, God's been kind and he's giving us some visible evidences of fruit. So that's led to me just having a huge heart for people trying to do that in other churches. And I'm hoping that Replant would not be me like saying, hey, here's exactly how to do this, because every replant situation is so utterly different. But what I'm hoping is that by, contributing some thoughts over time to here's what we did, here's some things I'm learning, here's some resources that are helpful, it would just be a part of the conversation with guys that are in a church that they're thinking, we want to bring new life to this. We want to bring life back to this. And the thing about it is, Jesus loves his church. Jesus died for his church. Jesus sees bodies of believers that are weary or tired or burnt out or struggling, and his heart is inclined toward them. And so the other thing I want to do is kind of, there's often with a kind of millennial generation, like, a gravitation toward, let's start something new, which we need new churches. You're going to talk about that. I have a huge heart for church planting. I'm on the church planting team for Sovereign Grace. So like, I'm all about new churches, but I also think some of our guys should be going into situations where they're trying to bring life to something that needs it. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping. So excellent. That I'm the replant side, but you are the plant side. So tell us a little bit about where you guys are, what your heart is for planting, and then what you hope that the blog does for people that are kind of in your situation.
Yeah. So for us, our church plant, we're the thing that's interesting about our church plant is that we are kind of on the we're obviously up in New England, kind of on the far reaches of America, but there's also a sense in which what we're doing right now in terms of the church plant is living in the new categories of Sovereign Grace's BCO and fleshing out what it means to live inside the BCO and church plant with a regional orientation. So there's a number of things that we're doing that's just kind of new for Sovereign Grace. But our church plant started out of it's starting out of a small group from our sending church. So King of Grace, Paul Buckley's the lead pastor there. Jeff Havistow and Sean Wu are on the team there, and I'm in the process of ordination for at King of Grace. But folks from the Manchester area were driving about 45 minutes south to go be a part of the King of Grace Church and because they wanted the good doctrine, the gospel-centered preaching. But along the way, they also wanted to be a part of a church plant with Sovereign Grace back in Manchester. So that's kind of been the long process, and we can talk about that story another time. But for the last year, I've been here interning and getting used to what does it mean to be a pastor, getting into the shoes of what it means to be a church planner. What does it mean to be a church planner, not just in general, but in New England, and to be a Sovereign Grace church planner in New England who carries and loves our Sovereign Grace values. And doing that in a city that is, so Manchester, New Hampshire is 110,000 people. It's about 2% evangelical, is a rough estimate. Wow. So you're talking about 110,000 people in the defined city, not including the suburbs and the area. You're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 Christians, evangelical Christians, and that would often include evangelical Catholics. So just very different dynamics here. It's a lot of people view New England as thinking that it's New Englanders are hostile to the gospel, and my experience here in New Hampshire is that people are just ambivalent to the gospel, ambivalent to the church. And so what does it mean to start as a church plant out of a small group and to build with the values of loving the gospel, being a worshiping community, making disciples who love Jesus and follow Jesus, who seek to make more disciples to follow and know Jesus. So there's a dynamic here where church planting looks totally different than it would in other parts of the country. I went to Auburn University, and so I know the kind of Southern culture where you can kind of throw out a church sign and you can get 100 or 200 people to show up to a church plant launch relatively easily. Well, we're starting with a small group and building up very slowly. And the whole intention of what we're doing really is starts with God's activity before what we're doing. So you have those folks from Manchester who were a part of King of Grace. They were a part of God's initial activity to be here. And then as we've been here over the last year, it's been cool to see how God's been overseeing and leading this church plant from the beginning. So when I go around and talk about the church plant, I talk about how I mentioned that, we live in this big old Victorian house. And on the second floor, there's these 2 one-bedroom apartments. The one above us was vacant for like 5 months over the winter. And then the woman who moved in had been a missionary in Papua New Guinea for the last 2 years and was moving in so that she could work at the hospital. I'm looking at the hospital right over here. She met another woman in the city who had been a missionary in Guam for the last 10 years and had just moved back to the area and was looking for a place to stay. And now they both, who've been missionaries in foreign countries, live in the floor right above us and are part of our Bible study and are reaching out and getting to know our neighbors and inviting our neighbors in and going over and having dinner and talking about Jesus with our neighbors. There's another couple that were anti-human trafficking, a part of an anti-human trafficking organization in Thailand, and they moved back this spring and came to King of Grace, are now a part of our core team. So it's just been cool to see how God's provided these missionaries, from literally around the globe, to a place. Manchester, New Hampshire is not sexy, and it's not on the leading edge of where you want a church plant. So from my experience over the last year, getting into what does it mean to be a church planter, trying to lead in what we're calling a missional community group or a missional context, where you're just trying to be faithful disciples, making more disciples who make disciples. So being very kind of low key, but convicted on our essentials. So what does it mean to be a church planter in that context? And I've read some church planting books, and I've talked to some church planters, and I did not personally think that I was a church planter a number of years ago, but just kind of learning the lessons over the last year, and then the lessons kind of that are coming up. My heart for our blog is to talk about those things that I'm in the process of learning, because they're not, lessons about like spiritual warfare. What does it mean to have demonic activity in your life as a church planter? Like, I don't remember ever reading anybody talking about that, but Paul Buckley, our lead pastor, caring for me and helping me kind of work through some very difficult times, that has saved the church plant. It saved my own soul from just going nuts. What does it mean in the new Sovereign Grace system of things for a church planter to fundraise? What does it mean to try to figure out branding as a church plant. What does it mean to set up healthy, simple structures for a church plant? I mean, we're making, mistakes left and right, and how do we try to be faithful amidst all of this? So just trying to talk about kind of the grunt work of and the glory of what God's doing in church planting, because I love what sovereign grace represents. I love our unity in our churches, and I want to kind of talk about what does it look like in this new day for sovereign grace to do church planting, which is what we're committed to from the beginning. And so I'm hoping that my contribution can at least be, a practitioner side of things, to the discussion about what does church planting look like. And if it's beneficial, I'd love for it to be beneficial for guys who aren't in sovereign grace. But that's kind of a part of, that's my contribution to the blog, I think.
That's awesome, brother. I love that, man. And I love that you're planting in an area that is not a cool area to plant in, because similarly, my area of El Paso, Texas is not a cool part of Texas. We have tons of church plants happening all over Texas. There is not, even large church planting organizations like Acts 29. There's not one Acts 29 church here yet. And there's dozens in most of the major cities in Texas. And I think God has a heart for cities like ours that, and I think the other interesting thing is we're in cities that typically most sovereign grace churches are very different from our demographics here. A lot of sovereign grace churches, let's just be honest, have been kind of in the suburbs, suburban communities, kind of had similar models. And we're in situations where we're trying to figure out, okay, we have these values that all these other churches have, but the way that we walk that out is going to be radically different. So I'm in a bicultural, heavily Roman Catholic area where a lot of people think they know the gospel but don't. And the younger generation is hostile or just doesn't care about church or the gospel. And so I can't, and then, even things like we've got the average income in El Paso is low. So in order for families to even have a house, both spouses have to work. There's not an option for them not to work. So if you have your whole women's ministry built around, let's just have tea during the day, like that may not work for everybody. And so just trying to figure out how do you in New England, which is radically different from the Roman Catholic Southwest, where I'm from, how do we each take those values and walk them out is something that I'm excited to see on this blog. Now, I want to ask you a question. So for you as a church planter, why is it important? Why do you feel it's important to be partnered with some organization like Sovereign Grace rather than just grabbing your Bible and 10 friends and heading over to Manchester?
I've thought about that a lot because there's a number of church plants that happen in New England, and typically they're kind of like the Lone Ranger guy who just kind of goes in and kind of what you're talking about, just Bible in hand. It is, if you were to go down like the 7 core values of sovereign grace, that would be like a great template to talk about like why it's essential for us to be with sovereign grace. To begin with, my own shaping and thinking about pastoral ministry and the application of the gospel to my own soul, gospel-centered preaching, a vibrant Reformed theology, charismatic gifts, all that stuff is informed by my experience with sovereign grace. But for us as a church plant, I think that there is a sense in which in a part of the country where there is either hostility in some ways, but ambivalence to the church, or if there is any interest in the church, there's suspicion because we're in, like you're saying, for your area, Manchester is a heavily Roman Catholic area. It was basically built on French Canadians and Irish immigrants. So, there's like, some of the two, most, Roman Catholic parts of the Western world moving in to build Manchester. So with all the Catholic scandals that went on, there's a severe suspicion of the church. And so to be planting with extra local accountability, like serious extra local accountability and extra local affirmation as me as a pastor. So it's not just like, I'm getting up and starting to preach. Like there's a process. Now there's a whole ordination process that we have, and we could talk about that another time, but there's the ordination process involves extra local care that establishes me as a pastor here. And I've talked, I don't know if other people do this, but there was a agnostic friend of mine in the city, and I was talking about the way we kind of do church government for whatever reason. And he loved that, like, we're actually accountable.
I love that you're talking to some agnostic about church government, Jacob. That's why you're awesome.
Yeah. Well, any part of Bible teaching can be used to reach anybody. And, you know, look, if you're suspicious about the church, here's how the gospel changes how we do, you know, how we think about authority. You know, and to be honest, there are not many complementarian churches in our region, like of all New England. So we're you know, a rare breed on its own. And so, but I do think that there is an aspect of gospel faithfulness that hinges on complementarian issues. And so that's Sovereign Grace's stance on that, and they're informing us on that and helping us think. You know, I'm looking forward to the conference this year with Owen talking about that value for us. So that aspect, you know, there's the plurality of elders. So it's not just a Lone Ranger pastor going in and setting up his own shop and just talking about Jesus and the gospel, but we're actually a plurality of elders coming in, and it's not centered on my personality because I don't have a dynamic personality. I'm not going to be the guy who's going to drive, you know, a major world ministry off of my personality. But I think it also represents that when Christ gifts the church with pastors, he gifts the church with the different types of pastors to serve different capacities. And so for us, we're building already from the beginning with other elders from our region, being a part of the essential identity of us as a local church, because it's not going to be the Jacob Young show. It's not going to be about me. And I mean, I'm going to be leading. I need to make some of the primary decisions and do the primary preaching, but I'm accountable. And there's other elders who are having a vested interest and a vested say in what we're doing from the beginning. Because the reality is that if I try to do everything on my own, I'm a bivocational church planting pastor, I'm going to run myself into the ground. But having other elders on board from the beginning and having the value to build up other guys makes it not about me, but about Jesus. And it makes it about the gospel changing and shaping lives, and not about me making management structures, you know? So,
that's awesome.
So that's kind of a part of where some of that for me comes from, and my love of Sovereign Grace churches.
That's great, man.
So yeah, what about you? I mean, for you with the replanting, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I would say, you know, for guys replanting, like for us, it's just been crucial to be part of a family of churches. And I know Sovereign Grace is not the family of churches that everyone needs to join. I mean, there's some great families of churches, denominations, whatever you call them. But some kind of a real tangible partnership. You can have a denominational affiliation that is totally non-functioning, or you can have kind of a loose family of churches that really is functioning in a powerful way. So, I mean, if you're in the middle of a revitalization or a replant or anything like that, I think you've got to find partnership. You've got to find people that will stand alongside you. So right after sort of I began leading in our church, soon after is when Sovereign Grace churches as a whole went through a massive crisis of leadership and polity changes and upheaval. And even in the middle of that, what's awesome was we're connected to a region of churches in Texas. And those guys in Texas that we get together with, man, I was burdened coming into a regional retreat one year, and I just said, man, I don't know if I can keep doing this. This is hard. And literally the other pastor, like, this sounds stereotypical, but it was real. I mean, this pastor puts his hand on my shoulder and says, dude, if you need me, like if you're having a hard day and you need me to like drive out to El Paso, which from anywhere in Texas is like 1 billion miles. And he was totally sincere, saying, if you need me to drive out from El Paso, give me like 8 hours and I'll be there. Like, if you feel like you're gonna quit, don't. Like, call me. I will be there. I'm going to support you through this. I'm going to carry through this. He followed up. Other guys were following up with us. And so I agree with everything you're talking about as far as our Sovereign Grace supporting us theologically, equipping us, uniting us theologically. But on the ground in a replant, in the fog of war, I mean, things are hard. Decisions are hard. It's tough to make calls. You need support. And just knowing that there are other pastors, other churches that have your back, that are going to love you, they're going to pray for you, and really contribute help. And we had guys come in and do seminars. We had guys come in to equip our team. You know, I had lots of conversations with other guys in Sovereign Grace about what we were trying to do, what they had done, trying to learn from them. So just having a vibrant partnership like that, honestly, that's what I see in the New Testament. I see that through the Apostle Paul and the other guys leading, these churches were connected to one another. They knew one another. They were sending greetings. I mean, Paul knew members in specific churches, not just, the elders of specific churches. He was there enough to know their life. And so that's really one of the reasons I'm part of Sovereign Grace, is I see that in Sovereign Grace. I want to preserve that in Sovereign Grace. And I want to see churches replanted with that kind of model. So
yeah, no, I agree. And that's, I think for us as well, I having a vibrant connection like what you're talking about, I think it really does make what Jesus does through the church more alluring and attractive to the non-believing world, to our non-Christian friends around us. Because I've experienced that already, and we're just a year in. So I love what you're saying, man. We need to get things wrapped up here because I think we're probably prolonging people's patience. But speaking of our partnership in Sovereign Grace, we have the conference coming up, and we have the Council of Elders coming up. And would you like to mention who we're going to have at the next episode of this iteration?
Yeah, so I'm excited because part of your vision, Jacob, is to have other guys in Sovereign Grace on to talk about things that they are either experts in or things that we can learn from them. So I'm really excited that since we're having the Council of Elders next month, we're going to have Phil Sasser, who's the chairman of the Polity Committee, which is the most exciting title in Sovereign Grace. But he was recently a member of the leadership team, still the chairman of the Polity Committee. He led the committee that formed our new Book of Church Order and our polity, and that is utterly unique. I mean, I don't know of many instances in the last several decades where people are literally forming a new, essentially, denomination around a Book of Church Order, trying to learn from mistakes in the past, trying to build for the future. And so Phil's going to be on to talk about that. And he is a Southern gentleman. And this guy put us all to shame when he was in town last year by asking us what movies we liked and what books we liked, and then sharing which books and movies he liked. And then I just felt like I had wasted my life.
Right. He's probably not making references to Guardian of the Galaxy.
Yeah. No. Well, but see, that's the thing. Maybe like Phil always surprises me too. Okay. So I'm excited to have him on, and this is kind of our intro. Hey, here's who we are. If you're curious, post. But starting next month, we'll get on with interviewing people. I think the conversations will be helpful, and I hope you listen.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ricky. We'll see you guys next time.